Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. One of the places that my journey has taken me is from rather debilitating social anxiety up to feeling confident and comfortable and easeful interacting with strangers. And so I want to kind of paint you a picture of where I started and where I landed, and then fill in some of the things in the middle that I think helped move the dial the most. So before I start, I just want to offer that even if you're excruciatingly shy and incredibly socially anxious and self-conscious, that doesn't have to be where you stay. It's definitely a learnable skill. It's a journey. For energetically sensitive people, I'm going to spoil this early on and up front. Managing your energetic sensitivity. So one of the really big game changers for me was learning to create energetic shields around myself and filters so I didn't have the bombardment of other people's energy. Because as someone who as a child and an adolescent and even into my 20s had an overly permeable energy field, I was just constantly incredibly overstimulated. So at the point that other people were learning social cues, it was so loud for me that I missed a lot of that. And it's a piece that is kind of non-obvious in our society that will diagnose emotional things and psychological things and learning disabilities and how our brain might be working differently. And I love that we are coming up with all these really cool ways to understand aspects of the human experience that make it different and not as easy to interface with the world. You know, children with learning disabilities or neurodivergence are potentially, if they get the right support, having a much more easeful journey. However, the conversation about energetic sensitivity isn't one that I think is permeating into the mainstream. And so you can end up really buffeted by energy. And as an adult listening to this, I just want to offer that a really good starting place might be to learn to filter other people's energy and command a clean, clear, protected zone inside your energy field to then interface with the world. That's a really good first step. I have my energy body illumination program, which is the whole manual I wish someone had given to me between the ages of 7 and 17 and then sat with me and made me practice, because I probably wouldn't have done it on my own. But my journey would have looked really, really different all the way along if I'd had that. So you can check that out in my Shamanic Academy if you feel called. And there are other programs and approaches, but obviously I'm biased for the one that I created to help solve this problem. So to paint you a picture, I distinctly remember dissociating in grade school when I was on the playground with other children. So it was pretty okay when we were in class, but we would go outside and suddenly everyone's running around and there are social dynamics and kids are blowing off energy. And I remember this sort of mildly nauseating feeling of suddenly this switch flipping, and it was like I was watching events unfold from a distance. And it was all I really knew how to do to unconsciously, it wasn't like a planned thing, but it was if I jump my soul out of my body, if I jump my awareness out of my body, it's quieter from a little bit further away. But then I felt like I was operating my body and my voice like remote pilot, and having a desperate need to not appear weirder than I already was. It was very anxiety producing because I felt like my potential for getting it wrong and having social rejection went way up in those moments where I was removed from my body. By the time I was 10 or 11 or 12, I would beg my parents at a gas station to go in and buy the candy bar for me. They're like, nope, it's a learnable skill. You got to be able to like walk into a gas station and buy a candy bar. And here's a great bribe where we don't need to make you do something you're scared to do. Here's $1. If you want the candy bar or the bag of chips, you can go buy it, but you have to go have that interaction. And I remember just so much tension around having to interact with a stranger around a very simple kind of function. I was also really late to the dating game because I was so painfully shy. I just couldn't hold a conversation with an attractive man for the life of me. I could kind of hold a conversation with a guy that I wasn't attracted to at all, which made for an incredibly awkward freshman dance where in PE I'd been chatting easily as we were forced to run laps in excessively hot weather with a upperclassman who, was very enamored of me, which I had no idea as 14-year-old Katie. And he showed up to the school dance with a bouquet of flowers and a declaration. And I had no idea how to handle that. No idea that I was, giving off these kind of indications. But put me with someone where I was attracted, and I turned into a babbling mess. And I'll be really honest, sometimes I do get a little bit babbly when I'm around somebody where there's really high sexual attraction and I haven't known them long enough to kind of get comfortable with them. There's sort of this rise of energy that makes me kind of tend to want to babble. But what I've learned to do with this confidence and centeredness is to be able to just call it out, to kind of call myself out in front of the other person. Like, you're just, really attractive, and that kind of makes me babble. If we spend some time together, I'll get over it, but that just is what it is. And when I diffuse it by talking about it, it can help really release the tension of having a lot of activation inside, but trying to look normal. I've just acknowledged that there's activation. And then, if the person's like, let me back away from you, that can happen. To be honest, no time that I've ever called that out has the object of my attraction gotten wide-eyed and backed away, but babbling Katie who didn't call that out has certainly produced that result. So I recommend it. And I just kind of learned to give myself grace with the occasional moments where I get tense for some reason. I'm around a bunch of people that I don't know, or I'm, kind of off a comfort zone for whatever reason. But it's a little bit hard. I know that some of the moments that I have the most shame and humiliation and embarrassment about were nothing worse than me being socially awkward and weird and the other person kind of looking at me like they didn't know how to make sense of this, very tall, kind of gangly, babbling woman. And in retrospect, like, there are far worse things than just talking too much too fast or stumbling over your words or saying something really weird or out of context. I admit I still sometimes kind of cringe with the Hollywood plot line when you're watching a movie and the person is just being awkward and being awkward. And often it's reflected with grace by the people around them. They just kind of move on. But I still think I have, that over-identification with that being a much bigger problem than it actually is. So when it came to dating, I got involved with the first guy I ever slept with and stayed with him for 7 years. And when that ended, much to the relief of all of our friends and both of us to some degree, it was, just really good, well-intentioned people who needed a lot of therapy before they really ought to be in deep relationship. And we were working on it. We were in therapy, but it just takes a while when you have those kind of patterns. So once we parted ways, I had very little experience, and I was coming to dating in my late 20s. And a friend of mine came up with the idea of a kissing quest, having noticed my painful awkwardness and lack of experience and frustration that I couldn't just move it along now that I really wanted that to happen. But it really is helpful to be able to actually talk to men in order to be able to date men and ultimately be involved with them. So she came up with the brilliant idea of a kissing quest. I think it might have been an internal dare on her part of whether she could talk me into this thing. She was hanging out, she was bored. It seemed like an interesting way to pass the time. Really beloved friend, but just that kind of like, hey, this could be interesting. Let's see if we could get, engineering Katie to go for this if I explain it to her. And part of what was really helpful about the kissing quest, where I walked up to a number of men that I had never met and told them I hadn't been kissed enough and could they help me with that, and some women in the mix as well. What was really helpful, particularly where men's sexuality was concerned, is that I'd been molested when I was 5. And fortunately, insofar as fortunately applies to these kind of things, it was someone outside the family structure. It was a kindergarten friend's father, which meant it was a one-time event. And my parents found out very quickly and provided support. But little 5-year-old Katie had made note of big energy that happens when men get aroused as potentially dangerous, and I wasn't having the easiest time updating the context as an adult woman. And the cool thing about the kissing quest, where I always had friends along with me, I didn't fly solo on this one to interfere. There was one time where a friend of mine had to step forward to the dude who thought that this implied more, even though I'd been really clear that it didn't, and say, hey, step back. Out of hundreds and hundreds of kisses. So statistically speaking, men were wonderful about this. I did get turned down. There were a number of guys who, had approached me and were showing interest. It was kind of a bait and switch, because here's a girl who's blushing and can't maintain eye contact and stumbling over her words, and suddenly you walk up to talk to her and this comes out of her mouth, about will you kiss me? And, for a lot of guys, that was, they stumbled back in dismay. I tell a joke about a guy who introduced himself as Romeo. We were in a medieval reenactment kind of experience. So we're all dressed up in costume and picking up names, and he swaggered up and I asked him to kiss me, and he just turned all wide-eyed and panicked and started trying to look around for something else that he urgently needed to do to get out of answering the questions. So, even people with a lot of swagger sometimes have social awkwardness, but it was particularly amusing. He turned out to be a wherefore art thou kind of Romeo. But the nice thing about that was I got to experience being in men's sexual aroused energy and being safe and having it be okay and having it just be energy. And that was a really critical part of my journey. In fact, I wrote a book about it, Sex, Shamanism, and Healing. You can find it on Amazon, and I go a lot deeper into all of this. But one of the problems that still persisted for the guys who didn't run away when I asked them to kiss me, and who did in fact kiss me, and I was then attracted to because they kissed me in a way that was pleasing, is I still couldn't talk to them. I mean, if you kiss a girl and she's attractive and you're like, oh, wow, you're really interesting, they kind of want to talk to you, and I still couldn't do that. So it took a while to stop babbling and blushing and all that kind of thing. And over time that really shifted, and I was on a first date with someone recently, and one of the things that was really powerful for me was at the end of the date, I was really clear he wasn't a match. There were many things that he shared about himself while I just listened politely, because I was listening to learn and wanting to understand who he was, to get a sense of whether I wanted to spend more time with him. He was pretty clear that he wanted to spend more time with me. And one of the things he indicated that he didn't like was overly opinionated women. And obviously, as someone who has a solo podcast and talks into a microphone, I have a lot of opinions. So he didn't understand at the time what I was saving him from. But at the end of the date, I was able to just look him in the eye and say, I really enjoyed the time, but I just don't see a match. And then hold the silence and the stillness to let that land, and to let him have the experience, and to talk pleasantly if he wanted to do that. He left fairly soon thereafter. And it wasn't the most fun moment, but I loved that I could just take a breath and hold my container and say something that I knew this person wasn't going to particularly enjoy hearing because he was having a good time and assuming that we were going to go forward. And to be able to, have that level of self-possession and choice and move with discernment really thoughtfully was a powerful moment for me for how much things have shifted and changed over the years. But I had even more of a feeling of reflection for that. I love to travel, and I'm drawn to more solo travel. I like traveling with people. There's certain experiences and places that I feel like it's better to go with someone, but there's a real richness to solo travel as well, and a way that you get to meet yourself. So as cruise ships were coming back into service, I got an insanely good price on an Alaska cruise, which had been on my radar for a long time. Every time I'd looked, the prices just seemed very unattainable. And by going on this somewhat last minute cruise, I just got a phenomenal price for my own room with a balcony, which was wonderful. But one of the things that was really interesting, I spent a lot of time alone being with the ocean and going on the onshore opportunities and walking alone in the woods and hiking, and just had a really grand time. But I had this whole run of time navigating airports and planes and airport shuttles and, lines for food and interacting with people in elevators. I didn't know a single person on the entire ship, and I really got to see the ease with which I just interfaced with people. I asked questions about things I needed on the ship. I'd never been on a cruise, so there was a little bit of a learning curve of like, how does this all work? What's the system that you guys have in place? And so I had a comfort with moving around space with lots of other people in it and asking questions and chatting casually with people in elevators, and also being able to choose my own space. There was a woman that we were on the shuttle together, and so we were all kind of chatting a little bit as we, rode the shuttle to the cruise dock, and she was also solo cruising. She's like, "Oh, you're solo cruising, do you play cards?" I'm like, "Nope, don't play cards." So I ran into her a couple of times, and she was really interested in, connecting and being friends. And we ended up on the same floor, and I saw her in the hall, and I'm like, "Oh, hey, I know you," and said hi. And she says, "Well, what's your room number?" And I just smiled and said, "Oh, it's nice to see you." "No, what's your room number?" She asked like 3 times, and I just evaded because I really did not want somebody to interrupt me by knocking on my door. Like, that would have made me so unhappy. And so I didn't want to tell her my room number, and I didn't want to have a big explanation of why I wasn't. She was really determined. And I just know that younger, more awkward Katie might have given information she didn't want to give out of social politeness or niceness, or not rocking the boat, no pun intended. And so it was just really lovely to be able to have pressure from someone to respond in a particular way, to know what the pressure was about, and to be able to stand in my space and not compromise or shift or come out of my center. And it was awkward. I don't like when people are not hearing a boundary. If you ask a question and someone evades, and then you get really persistent. There was a conversation with a friend. They'd announced a pregnancy, and one of the women was just really drilling into, how did it happen? And I'm like, you have to stop asking that. That's not polite. And one of the men just let out this huge breath that I had said something, in the middle of this awkward interaction, because she just got curious, and they evaded, and they, didn't answer. And she was just drilling down in the questions. So I get that people can really be in that space of intrusive curiosity when there's something you just, don't feel called to share. But for me, one of the cool things about the cruise was getting to really see this mirror of how easily and gracefully I moved through huge amounts of interactions with complete strangers without having my stomach clench or my palms sweat or my heart rate accelerate. That there was just all of these spontaneous, unscripted. I didn't have a job to do because that was one of the, kind of be out in public as someone who's shy, as, volunteer or participate strategies. I was just enjoying myself and moving in and out of my availability to interact with other people, and not having that dread. I mean, there were times in my life when just asking a question, asking someone what an item I was looking for was so stressful that I would try to walk the whole store first because it costs so much to try to engage with a stranger. And I'm still kind of protective of my energy in public. I'm much more on the introverted side, so I might chat with people if my energy is really full and up, but there's also, a certain amount of not seeking out strangers with whom to have conversations. I like my own company a lot. And there's often a lot going on with me of, what's moving through, what am I being present to? But it's lovely to be at choice where I don't have this feeling of anxiety and stress. I generally go into an interaction with humans trusting that I can be successful with the vast majority of the population. So some of the things that really, really helped me out with this, I've already mentioned managing my energetic sensitivity. I'm always going to be on the sensitive side. I, choose where I move in the world with discernment. I'm always going to be looking for the table at the restaurant that's kind of off to the side and not in the dead center of the room. And at the same time, there's an ability to hold space for myself, to strengthen my energetic protections, to turn down my sensitivity. So that's a learnable skill, but probably not one that you're going to find in the, how to connect well with people. Another thing that you may not have, but I had, that was sort of embarrassing to admit, but for the greater good, I definitely want to be transparent, is that as the kind of stress that I was under, that tension every time that I went to school, the desire to please authority figures, the good girl, the rule follower, the overachiever, those were some of my strategies. And being very locked into them, in addition to the straight A's and the minding the teachers, also came this really sort of rigid, judgy part, like there was only one way to do things because I was having relative success by, doing what authority figures told me to do. And as such, I really could be very judgmental of people who were doing life in a really different way. And so I spent a lot of time with a facilitated Byron Katie process where I was working with a therapist. And if you have less ego strength, sometimes Byron Katie can be a little counterindicated. I had kind of an inflamed ego because I was dealing with lack of safety. So when you looked at the second chakra, there was a lot of anxiety, instinct activation, lack of safety, and I compensated it for it by overthinking and overdeveloping and having a very rigid kind of worldview. And not surprisingly, if you're super judgy, people don't really enjoy connecting with you as much. So cleaning that up, which, really took some time. I was pretty rigorous about it, where I could be in an authentic, I trust you to be the absolute expert on how to deal with you. And if you don't like your results and you want to come ask me in a session, I'd be super glad to help you explore other possibilities that might work for who you are as a unique being. But I wasn't offering unsolicited advice to random friends, which makes people enjoy being with you more when you don't have a lot of agenda and ideas about who they should be. I also really worked with my reactivity in therapy, and I have a podcast on sensitivity versus reactivity because I'm still very sensitive, but I'm no longer so highly reactive unless I'm off my center. If I'm working with a lot of ambient stress, I can, edge into that reactivity thing, which, just tells me that I need to do a little more like foundational calm, center, bleed off the stress one way or another. But one of my friends described me in a loving way, acknowledging that she could find it in herself, because it's going to sound mean, but she really didn't mean it mean. She was acknowledging that the work I was doing in therapy was working, and that it was a lot easier to be my friend because I was no longer coming across as someone who was so thin-skinned that she would bleed in a high wind. and I could find it. I took offense where none was intended. I had I think of it as like an inflamed third chakra where there's so much sensitivity and you make everything about you. And, I had somebody who, has since moved out of my life, but she would, get triggered. I'd never know it in the moment. She'd come back like 3 months later and say, "What did you mean when you said blah, 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 blah?" And I'm like, that doesn't quite sound like something I would say. I don't remember what I said. I don't even remember the interaction. However you're interpreting it, what's your interpretation? Okay, yeah, I don't feel that way. But she'd been brooding on it and, having this anxiety about bringing it up. It's really difficult to be in a relationship with someone who has that reactivity. So sitting myself down in therapy and really working on cleaning it up was really useful. And I'm really grateful to the older women who in my 20s really saw the earnestness and the ways that I was figuring out deep connection to people. I was so overwhelmed energetically that while I did have friendships, in my teens, I was so isolated and overwhelmed that the real easeful, flowing heart connection, yumminess of shared experience was something that I was only catching around the edges. I was deeply lonely, and yet it always seemed to cost me more to try to be with people because of my social anxiety. And that was a really painful part of my teenage years and into my 20s. And I'm really grateful. I mentioned it's called the SCA, Society for Creative Anachronism, which is a name that if you don't already know it, kind of misleads people. But it's basically a medieval recreation group where one of the core values of this group of people is inclusivity. And so I had tried that with some Christian church groups who were very lovely people. And one of the things that was super kind is because they have the value of compassion and inclusivity, the fact that I was socially awkward and missed cues right and left didn't mean that I didn't have a place, that I wasn't invited, that I wasn't welcomed. And so, my first year of college, there were some very, very kind fellow students who were, very immersed in the Christian religion, who really, really, really made a difference in my journey because they had that value of inclusivity and kindness and, kind of the opposite end of the spectrum is the mean girls kind of thing. But the SCA was a better fit because, it just didn't have the religious or the ideological views. It was a playfulness. We're all going to dress up in costume and play. And again, it's a place where the socially awkward are really welcome, which now can make me not enjoy it as much because, sometimes being inclusive with people I'm not enjoying isn't one of the ways I'm generous. There are many ways I'm generous. That's a way that I try to limit my generosity. I'm going to try to find my way to back away from the person who's really, really hungry for my attention, that I'm not enjoying the interaction. But there are people who are super generous that way, and I found a lot of them. And then kind of as that emerged, there were some older women who could wrap their arms around my reactivity and my awkwardness and my judginess and just hold me in connection and then offer me some input about, some strategies that might work better. So I'm really grateful those relationships have sort of moved out of my life in the fullness of time, but I still have a lot of gratitude for older women who were resourced enough to not be so disrupted by kind of the loudness that was Katie in her 20s. So as I come to the end of this recording, I just want to really acknowledge the pain if you're someone who does have this really unregulated emotional response inside of you with the stimulus of interacting with other people or with strangers. It was interesting. Somebody said something to me the other day and I blushed and I'm like, wow, I don't remember the last time I felt my face getting hot through social embarrassment. And it was a constant thing as a teenager and in my 20s. And, I have really fair skin. So I would turn bright red. It would be super obvious, if I was feeling self-conscious, which I was a lot. And so I really want to hold the tension in my body and the anxiety and the babbling and looking silly and then feeling worse about that and having so much tension when I needed to be outside of a really prescripted, like if I'm going from this class to this class, that's the agenda, but put me on a bus for a ski trip and I'm like, oh, what do I even do with this? And just the missed opportunities to date because I was so overwhelmed. I certainly couldn't take in the notion that somebody just was interested in connecting with me. And the self-image that I had wasn't seeing myself through kind eyes. There was a lot of tension and vulnerability and stress and sometimes avoidant behavior. It's hard sometimes when someone really doesn't want to make someone unhappy, so they procrastinate. Like they don't tell them they're running late in a timely manner because it's so anxiety producing. And then you're like, if you just sucked it up and sent the text 30 minutes ago, I could have planned so much better. So it could be this terrible feedback loop where it's anxiety producing to communicate clearly, so you hold off, but then when you do, the person is much more annoyed, and that reinforces the whole thing. So just really, really deep compassion for you if you're in that place. I hope you can have self-compassion. And I really want to hold the vision that it is very attainable to be able to be socially confident. I would place myself as above average in social confidence. And it doesn't mean I don't have moments where I'm awkward or shy or, whatever else. I mean, I tend to assume that I'm fine. There may be people going, that girl is so weird, in their heart of hearts, but I'm not aware of it. I'm having genuine, enjoyable connection kind of across the board. There's an easefulness in buying a cup of coffee, which wouldn't have been the case for me at a younger time, and doing so with a certain openness and availability in my heart chakra, to have this kind of authentic connection. When they talk about mortality, new research is showing that loneliness is up there with smoking a pack a day for early mortality. It's so harmful to humans. And it doesn't have to be these like deep, meaningful, soul-inspired interactions. Pleasant interaction with the cashier at the grocery store can do a good job of meeting those needs. It's the kind of what allows the human, animal, and our health to thrive, which isn't the same as what's fulfilling to our soul. So our soul may have a real hunger to be seen and known and met, and this depth and this meaning of connection. And I absolutely have that. That is really high value. It's part of what I love about the soul retrieval work. There's an intimacy of seeing someone so deeply. So I'm getting to provide one of the things that I most long for, which is deep seeing and knowing and reflecting the person back and really being in their corner. I adore that about my work. So the biological need, though, for connection isn't needing to be that deep meaningful. It's just ease and pleasure, connecting lightly with people, a shared smile in the elevator. I joked around with people on the cruise ship just in the 2 minutes that we were in each other's company. And just being able to be relaxed enough in my body so I wasn't spiking my adrenaline and cortisol to the point that it offset any goodness of, oh, I'm socially connected. This is nice. I feel safe in the world. All is well. It's really hard to overcome loneliness when people are really scary. So I'm not going to say that it was an overnight journey. A way that I think can really fast track you and more success with people is compassionate communication. I came to that tool much, much later, so I had a lot of it woven in, and the Byron Katie work that I'd done gave me a really good foundation for getting the bones of the work, like what it's trying to show, not just some tools or techniques. And I want to be really clear, like, I can have a lot of success with a lot of people, but that doesn't mean I necessarily choose them. So there's still the sorting problem of saying, yeah, I'm not necessarily called to go deeper with you. The fellow who wasn't a fan of opinionated women and, said some, things that were, kind of borderline racist. I was like, yeah, I definitely, it's not going to work out. I've been studying social justice since, I was a teenager. It's, if you're spouting off with this, we're not going to hang well together. And he really wanted to connect, and I was just a no, even though I really do have a longing for more romantic and sexual connection at this time. It's something I'm in the online dating game and actively exploring. So all of this is to say that this person that I didn't want to spend time with still had a really positive experience of me. And as someone who doesn't like friction and intensity, I can tolerate it. I could take that deep breath and say the thing that I knew he wasn't going to want to hear because it was a respectful way to treat someone who had driven down to meet me, and because I've cleaned up enough of my trauma history not to be frightened to be displeasing for a moment to, a man. So lots of compassion if that's not where you are in your journey. But I think that moving toward health was being able to say that and hold space for myself. But in general, I don't like friction. And so treating people in a way that if I don't have to overwork for it isn't super triggering to them is just a more pleasant way to move through the world. And having adept social skills is really useful for not inadvertently annoying people everywhere I go and then dealing with the loudness of their energy. Because that was part of what was miserable as a kid is I could feel that they were not enjoying me and that they were finding me weird, and it just added to my tension, which made me babble more or be bigger in whatever bit I was attempting for connection. And then I would feel it failing, which was like this feedback loop that would increase the anxiety. It's that like, I'm aware enough to know that you're, really not enjoying me. I'm really missing the mark, but I have no idea how to shift that. And there's just a lot of remembered pain and joy in my life now that really has to do with my tenderness around, the tension you can feel in your body. And I have a real soft spot when I hear that in a client's voice, that it's really vulnerable for them to even be on the phone talking to me. So what I just really want to offer with this is that it is a learnable skill. It is possible to go from painfully self-conscious, very shy, extremely socially awkward, massively missing social cues, to being able to navigate in a skillful and adept way. And it was a journey of many years, and there are still times when I may have a moment of social awkwardness, but I just don't get debilitated by it. I'm like, wow, that was interesting. Gosh, that hasn't visited in a while. So there's an ability to have that just be an occasional experience and not make it mean anything about me or who I am in the world. So other than curiosity of like, oh, wow, I came off my center. That doesn't usually happen. What was going on? I can kind of be the detective. So I just want to send out lots of love to all of you if you're listening to this, because, if you've picked this topic, unless you're just really devoted to my podcast, in which case, thank you. But if you pick this topic, it may be a pain point for you. So I just really want to send love to you through the guides, and if you want to just take a deep breath, I'm asking the guides to sort of tag this podcast that anyone listening at this moment who just wants to receive a burst of love, that the guides are available to make that happen for you. So thank you for listening. And as with everything, I hope this is really supportive for you. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.